You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. At the start of every week, I sit down with another journalist to talk about the biggest news developing right now and how it affects the Pacific Northwest. We call it Front Page. And lucky to have David Kroman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times, friend of the show, here with me now to break down a really big news cycle right now, really serious news cycle. Thank you so much for being here, David.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So we're going to turn to our top story on Front Page.
We will not allow this administration to turn our nation into an authoritarian regime. That is not our America, and we will not allow this administration to change that.
That's Washington Governor Bob Ferguson today at a press conference in Olympia. He vowed to use every tool at the state's disposal to prevent ICE from violating the rights of residents in Washington state. This press conference was partly a response to the killing of 37-year-old Alex Preddy by Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis on Saturday. The deadly shooting, the second in a month in Minnesota, has stoked outrage and fueled growing questions about the tactics being deployed as part of the Trump administration's crackdown on illegal immigration. And David, before we go on, I kind of just want to get the facts of what we've seen here out, because there's been so much misinformation. And, frankly, we've seen a number of officials in the Trump administration lie about what is on video for everybody to see. So I'm just going to go through a timeline. And if you want to jump in, if you see anything or hear anything that I should add here. And it basically starts 9 a.m. Central Time in a Minneapolis street. It's outside of a donut shop. That's where Alex Preddy is first seen directing traffic and kind of filming Border Patrol agents. There is an operation going on. Preddy's got a phone in his hand. Somebody is detained on the ground, and a couple other civilians appear to be nearby. And at some point, an immigration agent shoves two women, and Preddy goes to intercede here. And he kind of puts himself between the officer who shoved the people and these women. Now, Preddy then and this group are pepper sprayed, and Preddy is trying to help one of the women to her feet. And that's when Border Patrol agents grab him. They tackle him. They wrestle him to his knees. There are 7 to 8 agents around him. One agent strikes Preddy repeatedly with a pepper spray can. An officer then appears to take a gun from Preddy's waist. And within a second, another officer opens fire, shooting Preddy in the back. Then a second agent opens fire. There are 10 shots total. And that's what, became clear as video after video from different angles and, people doing the breakdowns online, everything like that. But the reaction from the Trump administration within hours was to say that there was a would-be assassin, that Preddy was a would-be assassin. That was from Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem called Preddy a domestic terrorist. Greg Bovino, the Border Patrol commander, said that Preddy arrived wanting to do maximum damage and planned to massacre law enforcement. And that's just not what we see on the video, and that's not what we hear, again, from Preddy's friends and family who say this is an ICU nurse at the VA, and this is somebody who didn't like what was happening, but it's clear he wasn't arriving to do violence. I don't know, David, this has been one of the most starkly divided narratives when everyone online can witness something happening, and then we see misinformation and untruths from Kristi Noem and others about what happened. Your reflections.
And I think we're seeing a reaction to this that we haven't seen before, even in the context of this particular operation in Minneapolis, which is we're hearing from Republicans and people who are former allies of President Donald Trump expressing concern, at the very least expressing that there should be some kind of investigation into this Border Patrol or DHS officer. And, even maximally, you have the Republican gubernatorial candidate in Minneapolis dropping out of the race, saying that he can't look his daughter in the eye and support this. And this was somebody who gave legal representation to Jonathan Ross, the person who pulled the trigger and killed Renee Good earlier in this operation. So that is no small thing. And so I think the contradictions here are enough that it is sowing some doubt in people who might otherwise be supportive. I think another key part of this is the fact that one of the early explanations of why this was a justified killing in the federal government's eyes was the fact that he had a gun. And that flies in the face of a lot of Second Amendment arguments because, as you noted, the video does not suggest that he was brandishing this gun, which would be a problem. It suggests that he just had this on his person. And so you have Second Amendment rights groups who are normally kind of more affiliated with conservative politics coming out and saying, he had a right to have this gun, that he is guaranteed that right. And so the lines, the kind of partisan lines around this are being blurred in a way that, frankly, I just don't think we've seen before. And it feels like it's breaking through in a way that past operations or specific incidents, including, I would say, the Renee Good incident did not break through.
Yeah. I just want to read quickly from Alex's family, who gave a statement to CNN. Alex Preddy was a kind-hearted soul who cared deeply for his family and friends, and also the American veterans whom he cared for as an ICU nurse at the Minneapolis VA hospital. Alex wanted to make a difference in this world. Unfortunately, he will not be with us to see his impact. I covered the VA. I was a veterans reporter for a short time at another public radio station in Southern California. And I have to say, people who work in an ICU in the VA, they're mostly serving a really older population. Mm-hmm. The survival rate is because there's a lot of complex medical concerns and diagnoses that they're dealing with. And again, it's a more advanced age population. These folks have to have so much compassion and so much dedication to what they do and to, often providing comfort and care in people's final hours and final minutes on Earth. And we've seen the person who released the video on social media whose father had died at the ICU, and they wanted to show Alex Preddy reading a final blessing, basically, a final wish that he finds peace and the thank you for their service, this veteran. That just stands out to me because, again, we saw in the final minutes with Alex Preddy that he was attempting to assist somebody on the street. And it seems to be in line with the character that his friends and family and coworkers and people who have been speaking to the media have shared. Now, I want to turn quickly to this press conference that Washington officials held this morning. This was a pre-planned press conference, David. This was from Governor Bob Ferguson and Attorney General Nick Brown. But obviously, the Preddy shooting provided new context here. One of the things that they wanted to be clear about was that they would do everything in their power, the governor and attorney general, to try to protect the rights of Washington residents. But at the same time, they tried to manage expectations. Here's a quote.
Attorney General Brown and I cannot stop ICE from being in our state. We don't have that power. No governor has that power, and no attorney general has that power. On the other hand, we are not passive bystanders to what is happening, and we are prepared to use every tool at our disposal to mitigate against the harms inflicted by ICE.
They have sent a joint letter to DHS Secretary Kristi Noem.
In short, ICE cannot authorize itself to break into somebody's home. In our letter, we emphasize that if ICE attempts any such unconstitutional measures in Washington state, we will use every legal option available to us to hold the federal government accountable. We also make clear in our letter that we will use every legal option available to hold individual ICE agents accountable as well.
And that was in response to this memo that's been widely reported that ICE is able to use administrative warrants rather than judicial warrants to break into people's homes. What did you hear at this press conference this morning, David?
The thing that stands out to me the most is kind of contrasting it with some of the politics of the first Trump administration, which is when this notion of sanctuary cities or sanctuary jurisdictions became very popularized. And the contrast I see is that I think initially the title of being a sanctuary city was in some way sort of a passive or a commitment to passivity in a way, which is that we are instructing our law enforcement not to help, not to get involved. Our government will not get involved. We will not aid you in this. But in that is this sort of, we're going to stand back. But now I think we're hearing a lot more, something that sounds more proactive. And we're seeing this on a few fronts. So I think you could hear it in Governor Ferguson's comments there. at some point in the press conference, he talked about possibly using the Washington National Guard as a, quote, buffer between federal agents and protesters. So that is a new level of saying, not only are we not going to be involved in this, we're not going to help you, we may actually sort of try and prevent this, actually use our resources to make it more difficult for ICE to do their work. And there are a few other kind of steps that I think kind of tell the story to me. The other one being the proposal to ban ICE officers from wearing face masks.
Yeah.
That's one. And then there's a bill in the legislature that would say if you are an ICE officer right now, you cannot become a police officer in the state of Washington. So again, and I don't think that bill is going to pass, frankly, but it is kind of indicative of a shift in the tone, which is that not only are we not going to assist you, we are going to put up roadblocks to being an ICE officer or running an ICE operation in our state. The fact is ICE operations are up quite a bit in the state. There have been a lot more deportations in the state. So, they are, as of right now, continuing relatively unabated. But I think, again, it'll be interesting to see what the narrative shift over the weekend, how that kind of forces jurisdictions like Washington and Seattle to kind of take a little more proactive step of, we are going to actually get in the way of the federal government's ability to do these operations.
I thought it was remarkable that at one point a reporter asked the attorney general and the governor whether or not basically local law enforcement can arrest an immigration agent. And I'm going to play this in full. And what I heard was the attorney general not ruling out the idea that local police could do this at some point, but also trying to be cautious and not setting up a direct confrontation. Let's take a listen to this.
State and local law enforcement do not have to simply watch or look away if the law is being violated. If they see somebody being assaulted unlawfully or attacked unlawfully or otherwise having their legal rights violated, we do not expect state and local officers to simply watch or do nothing. It is important that each of those jurisdictions talk to their lawyers and legal teams, understand where those lines are drawn, and after an incident, the lines of investigative authority or prosecutorial authority can be very challenging to navigate. But I think the Washington public expects their local sheriff or local police chief or officers that work for either to not simply watch if somebody in their community is having their rights violated. We hope we're not ever in that circumstance in Washington state, but I think as a general matter, that is the expectation, if not the duty, that we would anticipate our local forces having.
I mean, what did you hear there, David? It sounds as though he's basically saying that this is a fluid situation, but he doesn't want to rule that out.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of not ruling it out is certainly notable. I think there's, though, what they're saying, what they're not ruling out versus what the practical reality is. I have a hard time imagining police officers wanting to take actions like that. There tends to be a lot of solidarity among law enforcement agencies, even across jurisdictions and levels. I think of Seattle Police, the head of the union, outgoing head of the union, Mike Solon, has proudly posted photographs of himself with Tom Homan, which is his right to do. But it just sort of is indicative that, I don't know that is within the culture of a lot of police departments to, actually make arrests of other law enforcement officers. I'm sure there are some that might consider that, but on a broad level, I'm a little skeptical of that being something we see in mass.
We did have this directive that was reported by Erica Barnett at Publicola and then Mike Carter at your colleague at the Times a couple of weeks ago that basically came from Seattle Police and tried to tease out exactly how these interactions are supposed to go according to the police. And I'm just going to read a couple lines from this. Employees will not assist, this is the directive from SPD, employees will not assist or participate in any immigration enforcement actions, but also, quote, employees will not interfere in federal immigration enforcement actions. So again, more along the lines of, passive, we don't get involved, we're not going to assist, but we're not going to get in the way. If somebody calls 911 about ICE activity, Quote, "It is the policy of the Seattle Police Department to respond to community concerns about unverified or unidentified law enforcement activities with a prompt and professional police response." And the directive adds SPD staff should attempt to validate the status of the individuals appearing to be law enforcement by respectfully requesting official identification when safe and feasible. They should alert SPD officers, the media team, so that the department can notify the community. And the officers should, quote, "address any collateral public safety impacts like demonstrations or traffic disruptions. If there is a reasonable concern that approaching may escalate risk, officers should maintain distance, request additional resources, and coordinate verification through dispatch or a supervisor." Certainly sounds like they're not telling officers, go ahead and put cuffs on an ICE or Border Patrol agent. That far from that.
No, nor would I expect, policing has a lot of discretion, has a lot of individual discretion. There are laws, but some are enforced more stringently than others. So in the context of that discretion, I just would not expect individual police officers to want to engage in actually arresting ICE officers. I just don't see that as being realistic.
Let's talk a little bit about the political fallout that's been going on here when it comes to the Alex Peretti shooting and how members of Congress specifically are reacting. There has been obviously growing outcry, just almost universal response from the left and from Democrats decrying what happened and asking for an independent investigation. But we have seen a few folks on the right begin to express misgivings. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the candidate whose name is Chris Maddle, the lawyer who was really the frontrunner in the Minnesota gubernatorial campaign, who just released a video this morning saying that he was dropping out of that race, citing his own conscience, feeling like people's constitutional rights were being violated, saying he couldn't look his daughter in the eye, and specifically saying that the actions by the federal government has made it impossible to win for a Republican statewide in Minnesota. That I found really striking. I want to go through just a couple more responses. The House Homeland Security Chair, Andrew Garbarino, a Republican in New York, had called for ICE and Border Patrol and DHS officials to testify before his panel. Mm-hmm. And that's when Republican Congressman Michael Baumgartner from Spokane got in. He retweeted his colleague on the Homeland Security panel's message, and then he said, quote, "I am disturbed," Baumgartner says this, "I'm disturbed by what I've seen from today's video from Minnesota. It's critically important that the American people in Congress be given a better understanding of how immigration enforcement is being handled, including the methods federal law enforcement officers are using to prioritize, identify, and arrest suspected targets." Surprising to you to see, especially Baumgartner, who I would think, he has been not universally supportive of Trump, but his voting record, is certainly in line with the Trump administration, coming out with this statement?
Initially, yes. I think it was a little surprising. I think the polls on this do not favor ICE and immigration enforcement right now. We've seen that, and in fact, I think even this morning we've seen a little softening from President Trump. He spoke with Governor Walz this morning of Minnesota, and there seems to be some effort to kind of ratchet this down. So no, it's not particularly surprising. I guess the thing that about this entire operation that stands out to me is it's sort of its origins and why it might not be being received particularly well broadly, and partially because it's pretty clear that this started with the fraud investigation into a lot of these Somali-run daycares, and that became this big issue that was made, I think probably appropriately, got a lot of attention. And
which was following years of investigation into welfare fraud that has been centered in, the Somali community. Not everybody, but a vast majority have been people who have been convicted are in the Somali community.
Yes.
The daycares were an additional step that basically a right-wing influencer had made a bunch of allegations about daycares. Yes. And this really just caught fire around the country and made it to the White House. This idea that there were daycares that were perpetrating massive fraud in line with the billions that had been stolen from welfare during COVID under the watch of Governor Tim Walz.
Right.
And so this was needed. This kind of crackdown on immigration enforcement was needed in order to protect from fraud, basically.
But that's the fundamental flaw there, though, is that the vast majority of it essentially became a targeted operation at the Somali community of Minneapolis. But the vast majority of those people are here legally. And so there's not actually a very good or any nexus between that particular issue, which is real and worth reckoning with, and the question of immigration and illegal immigration. And so if the goal fundamentally was to find as many people who are here without documents and to deport them, you can reckon with whether or not you agree with that. But if that's the fundamental goal, there are many other places in the country that those officers would find a much larger population of people living here undocumented.
Including Washington State.
Than in Minnesota. And so
it's about 2.2% of the population in Minnesota. In Washington State, it's between 4 and 5%. Minnesota has, by and large, just, comparatively, a relatively small population of unauthorized immigrants.
And so that as a result, it becomes extremely difficult to find a rationale for this that is not political in aim. And so then what you've done is you've created a law enforcement agency in immigration enforcement that is doing political work on behalf of a president. And so, whatever you want to make of some people's comparisons or some people have called this secret police operations, the fact is, if you're talking about trust and what people perceive the goals of this operation to be, it was sort of undermined from the start because the connection here was not particularly tied to the question of immigration. And so it's just hard to see it as actually trying to accomplish in an earnest way the goals that the president is laying out. So that's one piece. The other piece is just that, if you've covered, say, the Seattle Police Department for the last 10 years, or probably a lot of police departments around the country, you've notice that there has been a lot of federal oversight into how they conduct business. There's a lot of city council meetings. There's a lot of public agencies that just, not to say that there aren't problems with the Seattle Police Department, but when there are problems, it's quite easy to find a public record of those problems and to daylight them. And really none of that exists here, which is that, these agencies come in, they act without feeling the need to justify themselves or explain themselves. The officer who shot Preddy is apparently back on the streets. If you are an officer with the Seattle Police Department and you shoot somebody, justified or not, you immediately go on to administrative leave and you are not allowed on the streets until an investigation is completed. That is not the case here. And so there's this other piece.
And I will add that state investigators went so far in Minnesota to obtain a warrant in order to get access to evidence there at the scene.
Yeah.
This is highly unusual. I mean, these are supposed to be people who work together, but we didn't see that with the Renee Good. We saw that evidence was not provided. There was no coordination between state and federal. And federal agents, according to a state court filing, refused to honor the warrant from the Hennepin County judge and then physically blocked state investigators from the area. Sorry, continue. You're talking about what usually happens in an investigation if a police officer shoots somebody.
And so the reality of this is, regardless of how you feel about immigration or immigration enforcement, it is an operation that has a fundamentally political origin and is being conducted without offering any sort of transparency into how that operation is being conducted. And so if you put those two things together, then no, I don't find it particularly surprising that even in our very polarized environment, you are seeing some on the right, some who are typically aligned with President Trump, starting to question the wisdom and frankly, ethics of this entire operation in Minnesota.
President Trump blamed Democratic state and local leaders for egging on, quote, left-wing agitators to unlawfully obstruct ICE operations, which he says has created dangerous circumstances for everyone involved. I have seen a shift in the rhetoric over the past 48 hours or so, where initially this was focused on Alex Preddy as a domestic terrorist. Alex Preddy was intending to commit mass murder of law enforcement officials. That has clearly fallen flat with the public because everybody can watch a video and see what happened. So instead now what we see is that the administration and President Trump are basically saying Tim Walz and Jacob Frey are not, they are being irresponsible in their rhetoric. They are, when they call us Nazis or Gestapo, this is fomenting the protesters to come and harass our agents. And then, of course, there are going to be mistakes made. I mean, this is kind of the direction now that the conversation has moved. I think also just to kind of, put a bow on the politics of all this, remarkable turnaround in Minnesota for the Republican frontrunner, Chris Mattel, to step down and say it's impossible to win statewide when just a couple of months ago, the fraud investigation, had Tim Walz stepping down, saying he's not going to run for re-election. He had a lot of Republicans thinking that they could win in Minnesota, a state they haven't won the governorship since, early 2000s. So this is something that, has shifted the politics. We again see a bunch of Democrats, including Patty Murray in the Senate, our own senator here, initially saying that she didn't think it was appropriate to use this funding vote in the Senate as a lever to try to enact policy changes out of ICE and DHS. And now she's saying, no, we have to put our foot down, try to split off the DHS funding from the rest of that funding bill. So huge amount of shifting in the politics of this, even in the past couple of days. And any final thought here before we move on to something a little less heavy?
No, I mean, to your point, it's just I think President Trump came into office with a lot of support on immigration, and that is quickly declining as these operations are, again, I think breaking through in a way that we haven't seen before.
I'm here with David Kroman. You're listening to Front Page, and we are turning the page on Soundside.
Desperation for Stafford. 8 seconds left. Loading up near side. Nakua, is he out of bounds?
Oh, my God.
With 3 seconds.
Oh, he's
They're going to run the clock. That's going to do it. The Seahawks soar to Super Bowl 60.
Super Bowl 60, man. It's always clock management at the end of a game is always a little anticlimactic, but incredible performance. Boy, that was a nail-biter game yesterday against the Rams. And the Seattle Seahawks are going to go to their 4th Super Bowl. That Rick Woolen penalty, David, is now he's got to be the biggest winner of the day, right? So Rick Woolen, who got the taunting penalty that resulted in fresh downs for the Rams, and then a touchdown that seemed to be putting them on pace to take back the lead. Boy, nobody's more relieved than him today to see. We're headed to another Super Bowl. How you feeling?
I feel great. Yeah, I was reflecting on the last time the Seahawks were in the Super Bowl, and I was, let's say I was in between jobs, and so I had invested a lot into following and enjoying the Seahawks. And so when
this was 20,
they were in there in the 2015 Super Bowl. So I had spent a lot of time.
So you were unemployed.
I was unemployed. Is the non-euphemistic way of saying it.
You were a jobless bum.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'll put a lot of my happiness in the hands of the Seahawks. And so when they had the goal line interception against the Patriots, it took me, I would say, a few days to pull out of that hole. I'm in a much better place now. I have a job. I have a lovely family and children. So I feel I'm coming into this much more strong of heart. But at the same time, I think playing the Patriots in the Super Bowl could represent a really great kind of exercising of those 2015 demons for a lot of people who still wake up some nights in a cold sweat thinking about why they didn't hand the ball to Marshawn Lynch.
Or maybe exercising ghosts, because Sam Darnold famously in 2019, when he was playing the Patriots, said he was seeing ghosts. He was mic'd up on the sideline.
I know.
And I don't think he's ever been able to live that down. But now maybe the ghosts will be defeated. I got to say, so maybe Rick Woolen and you are some of the biggest winners out of yesterday. Biggest loser, me, because I was a Sam Darnold skeptic.
Yeah,
I just thought he's a cast-off. I'm sorry, Sam. I'm going to say some things that are wrong, but unkind. I thought he was a cast-off. I thought if the Jets, Panthers, 49ers, Vikings, they all don't see it, then I don't see it. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were, at a certain point in this season, a number of turnovers at key moments that made me real jittery. But, hey, he stepped up. I mean, I went into the game yesterday thinking this is going to be a defensive battle. This is going to be a low score. And, I mean, he blew it out of the water. Like, just the passing yards, the poise, no turnovers, just an incredible performance.
I think Mike McDonald said that he shut a lot of people up last night, so you were one of those people
I was
that he shut up.
absolutely one of those people. Let's hear from McDonald, by the way, Coach McDonald.
You are NFC champions! Congratulations, NFC champs. I love you guys. That is team football, 70 deep, okay? It took every single one of us to win this game. Put yourself in this situation.
70 deep, team football. And here's JSN, also post-game.
It's an honor to be here in Seattle. It's an honor to lace them up with these guys, and for us to be going to the Super Bowl, it's a dream come true.
Dream come true. Another big loser from the night is anybody who can't read Roman numerals like me. Although I really enjoy the symmetry of the fact that we are going to Super Bowl 60, which is, David?
LX.
LX. I learned before we started that you can actually read Roman numerals.
Takes me a second.
And the first Super Bowl that the Seahawks ever went to was XL. So we have a full circle moment. I actually got to attend the very first Super Bowl.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, back in 2006.
Which was where?
It was in Pittsburgh. Yeah. Or no, sorry. It was in Detroit. They played Pittsburgh. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. It was in Detroit. It was a miserably cold winter day. I got to go because my mom worked for the Seahawks for many years.
Wow.
Yeah, she worked there for 16 years. She was the executive assistant to a couple of coaches. And Paul Allen chartered planes for the staff to go, and we could bring our families. And yeah, it was just an incredible experience, even though in part having to go to the game includes you have to go to the loser party afterwards, even if
I didn't know they had a loser
there's
party.
There's a loser party. It's planned as a victory celebration, but instead it was the loser party, and people were much more subdued.
Did you yell at the refs in person?
We cried in the stands, actually.
I believe it.
Yeah. My mom and I, we hugged and we cried, and we said, they're going to take it from us, and that's what's going on. But you know what? The mojo turned around. We have a Super Bowl win under our belts. I don't think that, people are going to see a repeat of that, terrible end zone interception that we saw against the Patriots last time. And I just love a city that can, have fun and get behind the team, because we need it. We need some good news. We need some fun Seahawks partying right now, I think.
And the fact that both the Mariners and the Seahawks are good at the same time, I don't think that has ever been true. Has that ever been true? I mean, this has been, like, Seattle is a good sports city. And I don't know that I have ever been able to say that. I mean, there have always been fans, of course, of the teams and that are supportive. So it's always been a good sports city in that sense. But as far as a win-loss, to have two simultaneously very good teams playing at the same time.
Who even are we, David Kroman?
I don't know.
I don't understand.
A lot of my identity is a sad, suffering Seattle sports fan. So if we're good, I don't really know what to call myself.
Well, you stare at a mirror. We will bring Front Page to a close here. Thank you so much, David Kroman. Go Hawks. Thank you for being here for Front Page. Really had a blast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.